everyone? All right, can everyone hear me okay? Is this good? So far, so good? Okay, I'd like to welcome you all here to BUEI for our first kind of event of the year. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Janice Hetzel. I'm the president of the Audubon Society. This is a very exciting year for us because we are celebrating 70 years of being in existence. So we are the first, all my doing, of course. So we were the first environmental group in Bermuda, and we're still going strong. And most notable is that we are an all-volunteer organization. So we do all of our things with the help of volunteers, and many of you have helped us along the way, so we appreciate that. Our mission is to conserve Bermuda's special bird life and habitats for the benefit of all, and we continue to work on that. And when I looked at the 70-year history, you know, a lot of the issues that they were trying to address at the very beginning remain issues today. So the need for what we do is still quite strong. And I would say that we appreciate your support for showing up, and we always need more volunteers. So if you're interested in working with us on any of our projects or helping with our managing committee or helping us make the things we do happen, please let us know, and you can just email info@audubon.bm, and I'll get the email and I will answer and see where you can help out with us. Just a quick few things. We have several other events coming up this Saturday. We need some help at Seymour's Pond, 10 to 12, moving wood chips, if anyone feels like getting outside and doing that. On February 18th, which is a Sunday at 8:30, we're doing a birdwatching walk at the grounds of Government House. So it's a nice opportunity to kind of travel around Government House. That'll be led by Paul Watson. Send us an email if you would like to come. In March, we have two events. We're going to try and get some whale watching in if the weather allows us on the 17th. And then on the 22nd of March for the weekend, we've got kind of a Paget Island weekend fun. So it's not exactly a bird camp like we do in the fall, but it's an opportunity for us to get together. I'm sure there'll be some birding involved, and there'll be more details coming. And then the big event we have is on May 4th. Mark your calendars. We're going to have an anniversary celebration dinner. And at that dinner, we're going to honor David Wingate for all of the great contributions he has made for Audubon and, of course, for all of Bermuda. So hopefully you all can come. Now let me get on to the reason why you're really here, which is Miguel and his talk about 2023. What do we call it?
The big bird year?
Big year for birds in Bermuda, or something along those lines. So for those of you that don't know Miguel, he had described himself as an ornithologist, naturalist, and conservationist with a keen interest in bird watching and also now bird photography. Last year, he completed his PhD at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador. And his PhD, he studied the singing and breeding behavior of the white-eyed vireo, which many of us know as the chick of the village. Much of his kind of early start in this area was inspired by David Wingate. So we appreciate that input, that he's helped you become who you are and for you to be able to give what you're giving back to us. And with that, I think I will leave you in for a big treat.
Okay.
Welcome to Miguel.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I know the weather is absolute trash outside, so thank you. So hopefully you guys will enjoy my talk tonight. So basically, I'm just going to highlight some of the cool birds that I saw throughout 2023. And yeah, I just want to share what makes me excited, I guess. But before I start, I should probably turn this on first before I start. There we go. Before I start, I would like to, well, first is my talk. 2023, the big bird years in Bermuda. So acknowledgements, obviously my mentor, Dr. David Wingate, who sadly couldn't be here today, but he was very keen to be here. But obviously David was one that inspired me to become an ornithologist, and I didn't even know that was a career before I met David. I just thought it was a hobby, just bird watching, but it is a very important job. And my loving parents who are here too, thank you for letting me take the car at a moment's notice and burn up fuel chase birds from east to the west. I really appreciate it. My brother, Luke Foster, who actually got me into bird photography, which was crazy because I always thought I would do bird photography when I was retired. You know, if I'm lucky to live to be David's age, I always imagine myself being like an old guy taking pictures. But so thank you to Luke for getting me involved in that. The Bermuda Birders group. So we have a bit of a cult. There's literally about 20 of us on a WhatsApp group, and we're constantly texting each other like, oh, there's a sentinel crane here, or there's a ruby-throated, whatever. You know, so we're always running around the island, texting each other, and we go and look for those birds. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have seen probably half the birds I did end up seeing. So I'm very grateful to them. And similarly, members of the public, because sometimes we show up and they don't know who we are. They're like, we heard there's a rare bird in your backyard. And it's like, okay, you don't seem sketchy, you can stay. So it's like, yay. So, which is great. So, and of course, the Royal Gazette for always posting you know, their news articles about whether it be me bird watching or other people bird watching, just spreading the word. So yeah, that's me. So again, my name is Miguel Mejias, and as Janice said, I did my master's and PhD in Newfoundland in Memorial. So for my master's, it was my job to monitor about 300 nests. I was actually doing it alongside with Jeremy. Jeremy Medeiros, the current terrestrial conservation officer at Bermuda. So I was very grateful for him boating me around and dropped me to different islands so I could check and see how the birds were doing. So it was my job to monitor these nests and figure out were they successful, and if the egg went missing, trying to figure out what happened to it, and which nests were most vulnerable to introduced predators, mostly like crows and rats and things like that. For my PhD, I switched gears a bit, and I focused on songbirds. So instead of seabirds, I had like a microphone, and I was chasing birds around the bushes, recording their songs, catching them, putting bands in their legs so I could recognize the bird I was recording. And my loving parents were actually, I mean, they practically got their PhD with me because they were right along with me learning about these birds and helped me map territories and band them. So I really appreciate you guys for that too. And yeah, this is a picture of me sitting on a little island. There's a common tern buzzing above my head. So this is a bird that's, despite its name, is actually quite rare in Bermuda these days, unfortunately, mostly because of climate change. Hurricanes cause a massive mortality in Bermuda's common tern population. So right now we have about 10 birds left, adults, and none of them are producing viable young at the moment, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So bird watching slang. So this is a bird watching talk, and birding is a bit of a culture, I like to think of it. So there are certain terms that I think I should introduce you guys to because I may say it throughout the talk, and I want you to know exactly what I'm talking about. So a big year. So basically that's when someone essentially drops whatever they're doing and they're trying to see as many bird species as they can in a single calendar year. So if you live anywhere in North America, that goal could be 400, 500 birds species in a year. I've heard of stories of people dropping out of university to pursue a big year. So it's a pretty big deal for some people. Oh, for me too, you know. So in Bermuda, 200 is probably considered like the staple number to achieve. Twitching or twitcher, so it's not neurological. It's essentially when, again, you could be doing whatever that isn't, you could be doing something that's not birding, and you get a text, and you see your phone, it's like, oh, there's a rare bird like in Somerset. So you would just drop what you're doing, you would just go see that bird. In fact, you guys are actually lucky that this talk is happening at night, because I swear to God, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm joking, but yeah. So that's called twitching. A lifer is essentially a bird you've never seen before. So those are obviously the most exciting. But of course, the more birds you see and the more times you bird, lifers become fewer and harder to get. But yeah, so that's pretty cool. A mega is basically a crazy rare bird. So this could be a bird where it may turn up every 10 years, every 20 years, sometimes once in your lifetime. So mega is a pretty big deal. The term dip basically means you missed the bird. So you hear about a bird, you go see it, you missed it. Everyone else is seeing it except you, and you all seem to be like 1 minute behind. So that's the thing, dip. A bird magnet, so these are people who have this uncanny ability to step out, and whatever they're doing, they just see a rare bird. It just lands in front of them. You know, yeah, I do pride myself. I think I'm a bit of a bird magnet. So and funny enough, actually, this is not intentional. I'm actually wearing a shirt with a magnet on it, which is very, I noticed it like 2 days ago, and I thought it was hilarious. A nemesis bird. A nemesis bird is basically kind of the same thing as dipping. It's a bird where like you know it's around and everyone is seeing it except for you. So sometimes I'll be chasing something and I miss it, and I'll get a text message 10 minutes later from a non-birder being like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "That's the bird I've been trying to get for the past 2 weeks." And lastly, constellation prize. So that's basically same thing. When you dip out on a bird, you may end up seeing something just as cool or rarer than the bird you were originally looking for. So hopefully those terms make sense. So where are these birds coming from? So they are migratory, and in the Western Hemisphere, there are 3 main migratory pathways the birds take. We've got the Pacific Americas flyway, the Central Americas flyway, and the Atlantic Americas flyway. And what do you know, Bermuda happens to be in the middle of the Americas flyway. So yeah, keep in mind, these birds are flying over the open ocean to get to us. So here's our lovely country of Bermuda, and 21 square miles is what we say how big this island is. And keep in mind, before humans were here, there were 3 ways that species got to Bermuda, either by the wind, the water, or the wing. And unfortunately, we learned through the fossil record that many of these birds have gone, or animals that have gotten here have gone extinct. So animals that usually come to Bermuda in a place like this, we get them from North America or the Caribbean. And when they stay in Bermuda, they tend to evolve into something like unique. And that's what we call endemic. And like I just said before, unfortunately, we've learned that some of our birds or endemic animals have gone extinct. And it's for 2 reasons. The first one is one you probably would never guess, but rise in sea level, change in the height. So this big platform right here, so during the Ice Age, when the sea level was much lower, that was all dry land. So this would have been about 252 square miles of land. And so now we're in an interglacial period, right? So the sea level is much higher. So what's surviving today is essentially the tallest parts of the mountain or the peak of Bermuda. So many birds would have gone extinct because their habitat was simply drowned out. And then the other reason, which I'm sure all of you could have guessed, is humans. When humans arrived in different periods throughout Bermuda, 1500s, 1600s, they brought with them a plethora of species such as rats, cats, dogs, pigs. All these things decimated many of the endemic species we had in Bermuda because these guys evolved in a place where they didn't have to cope with that for thousands of years or longer. So they just had no defense mechanism. So unfortunately, we did lose a lot. So just to give you an example of what we've lost, so David Wingate did a lot of explorations in caves, and he's found fossils. And essentially, when you find a fossil, you would usually ship it away overseas and compare it to a collection overseas to see if it matches. And sure enough, many of the bones he discovered, they didn't quite match what was found in other places, which told us this bone belonged to an endemic or a unique species in Bermuda. So it turns out Bermuda used to have an endemic species of hawk, a rail, a towhee, a night heron, dove. We had a Bermuda dove, as well as a woodpecker, which is pretty cool. So I also take pleasure in reading a lot of old books based on people's adventures in Bermuda, bird watching back in the 19th century. And probably one of my favorite entries is from this gentleman here, Savile Reed. And basically he depicts his story of this bird. This is the chick of the village, or the white-eyed vireo. So this is the bird I did my PhD on. And I'm sure all of you have seen this bird before. It's very common throughout all of the woodlands and parks throughout Bermuda. Very cheery song, chick-choo, chick-a-wee, it sounds something like that. And we call it chick of the village because that's what we think its song it sounds like, essentially. And but I have so much respect for this bird because it's no bigger than a little chicken drumstick, and it's survived everything. So I think it's along with the cahal, I would say it also embodies what it means to be Bermudian, just tough and adaptable. But nonetheless, here's a funny little clip that I found in his book describing his encounter with this bird, and I really think it will paint a different picture of what Bermuda was like, well, birding-wise. So it says here, the smallest bird and one of the most common resident Bermuda birds, familiar to all through its sprightly ways, loud song, and astounding impudence, is termed locally chick of the village, or chick-choo-williu for its note. I have found it usually from 3 feet to 12 feet above the ground in cedars, mangroves, Bermuda holly, pomegranate, and lemon trees, but most commonly in the cedars. It comes in hissing and scolding within a foot of one's head, puffing itself up with malignant fury. I have touched one in the bush with my gun before it would budge an inch. And when Let's see here. Oh, and they come in from all directions, playing all sorts of antics on the bird watcher, on the tops of the branches, apparently imitating the movements of rare birds, in order to induce one to waste a shot on them. Several times they succeeded with me, and on one occasion, the bird having lodged at the top of a very ugly-looking tree, I tore my hands and clothes to pieces in my anxiety to secure the supposed prize. But in spite of this, I have great regard for the cheerful little fellows whose song does a lot to relieve the monotony among the cedars. So back in those days, people used to shoot birds with guns. Like that was bird watching. You know, you see something unusual, what's that? Blam! Like that was how people shot. Well, that's how people bird watch. These days, when we say bird watching or shooting, we now mean these very huge, high-powered digital cameras. And it's great because now you could shoot birds without killing them. So people always ask me, how do I get into bird watching? What's the first step? I always tell people, know your backyard birds. So we have about 17 species that breed in Bermuda that are here year-round. 6 other species that do breed here are migratory, but in total we have 23 birds that breed in Bermuda. So these include songbirds, seabirds, herons, a rail, shorebird, and an owl. So everyone knows the European starling? Yeah, by far Bermuda's most common resident bird. So someone thought way back in 1890, they thought it would be a great idea to have every single bird in Shakespeare's plays represented in North America. So they shipped a few hundred to Central City, or Central Park in New York, released them, and they slowly but surely spread across the continent. And we believe some of those individuals ended up migrating, and they arrived in Bermuda around in the 1950s, sorry. European starling, but still quite a gorgeous bird. The house sparrow, another introduced species, brought here about 1890. And unfortunately, if anyone has a bluebird box, you know how annoying these birds can be. So they are cavity nesting birds. So we introduced them to Bermuda, and now they compete for nesting cavities. And this is part of the reason why our bluebirds are in trouble. So yeah, it's just one of those things. It's going to be a reoccurring theme throughout this talk. You're going to see yeah, we really screwed things up with all these introductions. Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, great Kiskadee. Perfect timing. So yeah, so brought here in 1957 from Trinidad as a biocontrol for lizards, all the annual lizards that crawl up the walls. So the lizard, funny enough, was also introduced. So then in 1957, well, let's bring in something to control the lizards. And this was the answer. The great Kiskadee is named after the song, Kiskadee, Kiskadee. They are flycatchers. Some people think they're kingfishers, but they're actually they're a tyrant flycatcher. And you've seen them, they're very feisty birds, and when they're pissed off, they put their crown up and it's bright yellow. But they're, again, quite photogenic. The eastern bluebird, one of our beloved native birds we have in Bermuda. And unfortunately, they have significantly declined because when the cedar blight hit, killed all the cedars, and the cedars had plenty of cavities for these birds to nest in. So then when the cedars died, we of course cut the cedars, and the bluebirds lost out. They lost most of their nesting habitat. So nowadays, probably about 95% of Bermuda's bluebirds rely on boxes that we provide for them to nest in. So they lost the cedars, and then they have the house sparrows to contend with. So the bluebird, unfortunately, doesn't have it pretty good. It's pretty hard for them these days. The redbird, or more appropriately, the northern cardinal. So believe it or not, this bird is not native to Bermuda. It was introduced. We're not too sure when it was brought to Bermuda, but these birds aren't migratory. So likely someone brought them in as a cage pet, and they were released into the wild. But thankfully, they're quite benign. They're not cavity nesters, so they're not troubling the bluebirds whatsoever. And they don't seem to be in conflict with any other of our native birds. So I guess it's a welcome addition, I suppose. Although I've noticed I don't see them as much, so I hope they're doing okay, but I've noticed a bit of a decline. They're not as abundant as I remember, so that was pretty to see. The feral pigeon. So they can be photogenic in the right light, as you can see by the colors on the neck here. I thought it was a gorgeous bird, but they are a filthy invasive species. Again, this is a cavity nesting bird, so the biggest issue we have with them is, well, in addition to sitting on your roof and pooping over it and then you ingest it when you drink the water, that aside, they do compete with nest cavities with longtails. So longtails nest in the rocky coast, and sure enough, the rock pigeon also inhabits those same cavities. Now keep in mind, longtails do tend to use the same nest year after year, but they're not here year round. So sometimes a longtail will go out to sea at the end of breeding, and a pigeon will come, take in the nest, foul it up, poop in it, and when that longtail comes back the previous year and sees this ugly pigeon, it's like, I don't want to use this nest anymore, I'm going to go look for another one. So pigeons are a really big issue in Bermuda in that regard as well. The beautiful European goldfinch. Beautiful bird, very common backyard bird we have, very distinctive with the red face, white head, and black nape. Beautiful gold wing panel, hence why we call goldfinch. And another introduced bird brought here in about 1890. And yeah, so they love eating seeds and thistles. So I took this picture, I think I was at Cooper's Island, and it was a bunch of like sow thistles, and this bird was just landing on it and just bent over. I just thought it was a cool picture. But once again, they seem to be, to my knowledge, fairly benign. Although they do eat casuarina seeds, so they might be spreading casuarinas. But they certainly love nesting in them. So if you go out, they build these nice little, cute little nests you can hold in the palm of your hand. So if you step outside after a gale, like especially like in the spring or in the summer, the ground is sometimes littered with their nests. So yeah, but thankfully, again, they seem to be fairly benign. The mourning dove, native bird. So it's not called mourning as in time of day. It's mourning as in like, I'm sad, I lost my partner. Like, so their sound is like, I'm sure you've heard that sound before. It's probably the best bird impression I could do, that's it. So yeah, so they're native. They love eating seeds, especially from the grass blades, like right here. So yeah, your backyard could be covered with these birds. They're everywhere. They're actually a very popular game bird in the States. So like millions of them get blasted, in America. But thankfully we don't shoot them here. The controversial yellow-crowned night heron. So I'm sure you guys have seen this bird around. Unfortunately, this bird has a very bad reputation, so I'm going to do my very best to quickly convince you otherwise. So believe it or not, this bird is indeed native. We do get them in Bermuda. You probably just don't notice the migrant birds because we have our own resident population. So the resident birds will mask the migrants coming in. And remember that endemic heron I told you about a few slides ago? So we believe that endemic heron, the one that was in Bermuda, evolved from yellow-crowned night herons. So they have been here for a long time. So when we lost the endemic heron and the crabs were just everywhere, David thought, well, this predator is missing from our ecosystem. So he imported some in 3 waves. It was like, I think it was 76, 1977, 1978. And yeah, and now, yes, they're everywhere, and they did do a number on the crabs, but so did traffic. But nonetheless, they are indeed like a native bird, although our population originated from a reintroduction. But otherwise, I think they're pretty cool. And they love French fries. So if you go Ice Queen, you'll see them begging for French fries. Not saying you should feed them French fries, but I digress. So the way I've got this talk set up, I broke down the year in the 12 months. So I'm basically just going to give you a quick introduction to the month, highlight 4 or 5 birds that I thought were really awesome, and yeah, and hopefully we should be able to burn through this within an hour. Oh, less than an hour. So January, very windy, chilly. We get several cold fronts this time of year. So cold fronts are a really big deal for us. So actually becoming a birder, I notice I pay way more attention to the weather now. I never used to care about the weather, but now I'm like watching it obsessively. So it's pretty funny what birding does to you. But yeah, so cold fronts are so these cold weather systems coming from the northwest, North America, and essentially they sweep across the continent in a southeasterly direction. And as a cold front comes through, they leave behind a wake of southeasterly winds. So in the fall, migrant birds trying to get south will take advantage of those powerful winds, and that helps propel them south. Use it as a tailwind, essentially. So in January, there's plenty of, it could be about 200 species of birds on the island at any given time in January. But keep in mind, those birds in January were here from previous fall, if that makes any sense. So the birds you see in January are just overwintering birds that had arrived in like November and October of the previous year. But it's a good year to see gulls, raptors, woodpeckers, warblers, shorebirds, and sparrows. So at the end of January of 2023, I ended with 105 species. So a pretty good start to my goal. So this is the Townsend's warbler. So this is a pretty rare bird. They're from the west coast of like Alaska, BC, California, in the boreal zone. This was the 11th record for Bermuda. And I found it in the Arboretum, which was pretty cool. I was walking by the exercise equipment, and there's an olive tree right next to it, and this little bird popped out. And they're very distinctive, that beautiful yellow face, black mask. So I was really excited to see a Townsend's warbler. This was January 1st, by the way, of 2023. So it was pretty wild. And also at the Arboretum was a downy woodpecker. This is the smallest woodpecker in North America. Very recognizable, white belly and a checkered back. And I could tell this bird is a male because most male woodpeckers have a bit of a red patch on the back of the head. So if you're looking at a woodpecker and you see some red in the back, it's a good chance it's a male bird. But it's an extremely tiny bird. This bird is about the size of a house sparrow. And at one point, I thought it was trying to nest in Bermuda because they are cavity nesting birds. But keep in mind, a downy woodpecker is so tiny, they actually can't excavate their own cavity. They have to rely on cavities made from bigger birds. So my dad called me over when he was washing the car at the Arboretum, and this bird was like sticking its head in this hole, and I was like, oh, maybe they will nest here one day. We had an endemic woodpecker. This is how it starts. But that one didn't nest. The ruby-throated hummingbird. So we do get hummingbirds in Bermuda. This tiny little bird beats his wings at about 50 times a second. So seeing it with the naked eyes, these wings are nothing but a blur. So the cameras nowadays can slow these moving objects in real time. And I was actually at Botanical Gardens with my dad with this picture. And this will probably always be my favorite picture because my dad's from Trinidad, and he hadn't seen hummingbirds in about 60 years. Sorry for the age thing, Dad. So I was very excited to see this hummingbird with him. So this is a ruby-throated hummingbird. And if you want to attract them to your yard, they love orange flowers, orange, yellow, usually things that are tubular. Yeah, and some of us do have awesome gardens that you get them every year. So if you see a hummingbird every year, you're definitely doing something right. It's all about the right flowers. The Bohemian waxwing. So this is an unusual bird. Again, from Northwest, so Alaska, BC, Nunavut. So when I think of a Bohemian waxwing, I think of snow. This is like a snowbird. And I found this bird, I think it was like the second week of January. And it was kind of funny because I was birding in a place I'd never go. My aunt had just passed away that week. And I found myself birding at Orange Valley. And I never go there, but I was just walking around. And I heard this thing calling. And I looked up, and it was this thing. I photographed it, and I just lost my mind. I couldn't believe it. So this is only the third time it's been seen in Bermuda. Like David Wingate's never seen a Bohemian waxwing in Bermuda, which is crazy. So I was happy to experience this for myself. But they have a very uncanny ability to home in on fruit. So when they usually show up in like flocks of 20, 30 birds, and when they find a tree with lots of fruit, they strip it down, and then they move on like a gang. But it was only one that I saw, but one is definitely better than none. Okay, so February, which is what we're in right now. So at the end of February, I ended with 111 species, so I was getting up there. Coldest, windiest month for Bermuda, and we're battered by more cold fronts. But this is when many waterfowl begin departing the island. So waterfowl being like ducks, like this lesser scaup right here. But still a good month to see shearwaters, warblers, shorebirds, and gulls. The Canada goose. There's a reason why this bird is not the national bird of Canada. Canadians hate Canada geese. You ask any Canadian, 99% of the time they're going to say, I hate those birds. Yeah, see? There you go. But they love open green space, and they've adapted well to our urban environment. They nest on top of buildings sometimes. When they have young, that's when they're at their worst, because a loving parent should protect their babies. So when people are walking to work and there's a Canada goose with their babies coming, they fly and they hit you with their wings, and yeah, so they're very aggressive birds. But I don't mind. I've never seen the worst of them, so I have no issue with them personally. So they don't nest here. Yeah, so they're not as nasty. But this one was picked up at Port Royal Golf Course. So golf courses, believe it or not, I tell my Canadian friends this all the time. They laugh at me, but golf courses are amazing birding habitats in Bermuda. It's just open green space. They have ponds there. Waterfowl love it. Geese love it. So yeah, they just graze the grass. So Canada goose was nice. We also have black-crowned night heron. So this bird is a distant relative to the yellow-crowned night heron, the one I showed, the ice queen bird. This is its cousin right here. And if you're looking at a heron, and it's typically, spoiler alert, if you're, unsee what you just saw. So like this bird here, if you're looking at a heron and they're typically brown and speckled like that, that's indicative of an immature bird. But I photographed an adult, but I didn't put it in because it was this year. I'm a stickler like that. So if you want to know what it looks like, you have to look it up. But I promise you the adult birds are gorgeous. Beautiful red eye, extremely red. It's like ketchup red, ruby red. And his white belly, the black cap. I think they're actually prettier than the yellow crowns, but that might be because we always have yellow crowns here. So I bet if it was the reverse, maybe I would think yellow crowns is prettier. I don't know. Hooded warbler. This bird is native to the southeastern United States. And in the wintertime, you can find them in almost every thicket in Bermuda. But they have declined significantly. So when David was birding in the 60s, he would find these birds like everywhere. And nowadays, you'd be lucky to see maybe 5 in any given winter in Bermuda. So it's called a hooded warbler because of that beautiful black hood. That makes it a male bird. Females look very similar to this, except they don't really have much of a hood. They have like a faint outline of a hood. And again, so my aunt who passed away, the same one, after her funeral, I was walking back to the car. I heard a chip in the bushes. I said, okay, I'll go check it out. And then this popped out, and I photographed it. So yeah, so hooded warbler is a really cool bird. The osprey. So people call this the fish hawk as well. There's always an osprey in Bermuda at any given time of the year. And it gives this illusion that they're the same individuals always here, but they just come and go. You know, some may spend the summer and leave, and then another one comes in. But there's always about maybe 2 or 4, maybe 5 across the island at any given point. And unlike most birds of prey, they eat their diet is almost exclusively fish. And they have a cool habit of, when they catch a fish, if this is the fish and I'm the osprey, they have this cool habit of like carrying it like this, and like a torpedo. So they keep the fish like streamlined with his body. And they actually have these really cool barbs on their little feet that help them hold on to that prey so they don't drop it. My friend actually took a really good picture of one like a few days ago, right above his head, and it's massive. I think it was a Bermuda bream. But yeah, ospreys, you see them like in bays and harbors circling, always on the lookout for fish. And they're quite successful. Usually about 1 in every 4 dives, they catch something. So ospreys are always a pretty cool bird to see. Peregrine falcon. So this is one of my favorite birds. I photographed this one. I was driving by Stone Crusher Corner, and I saw my dad I think my dad actually, now that I think about it, you're a bit of a bird magnet, I think, because usually you're with me when I see things like that. I was driving by Stone Crusher, came around, I saw this bird hunting these pipits on the side of the fence. So I literally just pulled over onto the grass, and I stuck my camera out the driver's window, and I managed to shoot it just in time. So this bird's pretty cool. They hunt pigeons with a spectacular dive. And when they're diving, they move at about 275 miles per hour. And during that dive, it's the fastest animal on the planet. So I was really happy to come across that peregrine falcon. Okay, so now we're in March. Springtime, so I was sitting at 118 birds. Still quite cold, albeit sunnier. But this time of year where a lot of these birds start, the migrant birds in Bermuda spending the winter, this is when they start leaving. They start departing, heading north. And you hear a lot of singing this time of year as well. So that's why I got the little chickadee village. And that's one of my banded birds. You can see he's got red and pink. This bird lives at Spittle Pond, by the way. So the eastern car park, he lives in the bushes like right at the top of the car park. He's still there. I banded him about 5 years ago, and he's still in the same area, which is really cool. Okay, so this is the hairy woodpecker. This is the bigger cousin of the downy that I showed you back in January. So this is really cool. So this was, I believe, only the second record of this bird in Bermuda, but I was the first to photograph it, which was really cool. A bird watcher by the name of Paul Watson saw one, I think in the early 2000s, but he didn't have a picture of it, unfortunately. So I was able to photograph this bird at the Botanical Gardens. So it's much bigger than a downy woodpecker, huge. So in fact, they were sitting side by side. It's like David and Goliath. But if you look at it, it's got no white spots. Sorry, no black spots in the tail, and the bill is quite huge. And also remember that red spot I told you about on the back of the head? There's no red, so this is a female bird. They're found all throughout Canada and the States, and they're not usually migratory. So to see downy or a hairy woodpecker in Bermuda is quite unusual. It's probably a really nasty winter system that just knocked them off the continent. They don't really mean to come here, but if a really bad cold front pushes them off, it's like, well, I got to keep flying south because I can't fly into the cold front. And if they're lucky, they turn up in places like Bermuda where they could spend the whole winter and survive into the following spring. Herring gull, doing what they do best. So this is a herring gull eating a piece of a slice of tomato. So I took this picture at St. George's Harbor by Whitehorse. So people were just throwing food into the water. And I love herring gulls actually because they actually have a habit of shoplifting. So if you go on YouTube and type in like gulls shoplifting, these birds will literally like, they just walk up to like a sliding door, you know, in a grocery store, and then they wait for a human to come out and the door will open. So the gull will just rush in and it'll grab like a bag of chips and it'll stand at the door and wait for a human to come back. And then when they come out, they rush back out with the bag of chips. So you should look it up on YouTube. It's hilarious. They are one of our most common gulls we get in Bermuda. But I just thought this bird was, I just thought the picture was pretty cool. Okay, this is a horned grebe. This is not an ugly duck. This is a grebe. A grebe is essentially a compact, small loon, if you're familiar with loons, like the diving birds. So grebes do the same thing. They hunt by swimming on the water, and then they dive under, and they just grab whatever they can see. It could be a fish, a crustacean, some sort of seagrass, and then they pop up to the surface like a cork, and they eat it, and then they go back down again. So this bird was found by Jill Rain, Andre Rain's mother. So she lives in St. George's Harbor, and she saw this bird. She lives like right on the harbor. So she saw this bird. She's like, what the hell is that? So she texted the birder group, and then we all twitched it, and then we all got our photographs of it. But this bird is stunning in the breeding season. So imagine this bird, but all this is black, and it's got these two golden horns. That's why we call it the horned grebe. It's got these two golden like wisps right around here. Beautiful bird in the breeding season, stunning. But this was a lifer for me, so I was just as happy to catch up with it. The Baltimore Oriole. This was at Botanical Gardens. The same day I was looking out for the hummingbird, that bird was hanging around. So it's called Baltimore not because of like, you know, the city in the States. Turns out there's a family whose last name is Baltimore in the UK, and their family crest has orange, black, and white. So it turns out that's why they're called the Baltimore Oriole. Very beautiful birds. They love eating fruit, and they like drinking from hummingbird feeders, apparently. So someone hung a hummingbird feeder for the hummingbird at Botanical Gardens. This is only sugar water, and that's it. By the way, I find it ironic that many Bermudians have no idea there are hummingbirds here, but if you walk into Gorham's, they sell hummingbird feeders. So think about that when you lay your heads on the pillow, you know. It's very ironic. The black-necked stilt. This bird's pretty cool. So this bird here is the second tallest bird on the planet relative to its body size, only surpassed by the flamingo. So it stands at about 13, 14 inches tall. So a good time to look for them is after heavy rain. So usually like if there's a field that you're aware of that floods, like Bernard's Park, like it literally becomes a lake. We call it like Bernard's Lake sometimes because like there's no grass. Perfect time to look for rare birds that time of year. So this bird, very distinctive, standing on these beautiful pink bubblegum legs. Something I want to point out as well, it's funny, when you become a photographer, you look at your picture sometime and you're like, if only the bird was doing this, it'd be a... So I couldn't help but notice, and I should have mentioned it, I don't want to ruin it for you, but for me, when I look at this bird, I had mixed feelings. This bird is exhausted. So if you look at his eyes, that bird is sleepy, you know, and so we do have... So sometimes birds come in, they're not in the best of shape. So when I see this bird in this photograph, I'm like, you know, but I hope it made it. But you can understand, I mean, these birds are flying like sometimes two days straight over the open ocean to get to Bermuda, and they're just running on fumes and they're exhausted. You know, and we do have rehabbers across the island that help with these things, most notably Lynn Thorne, who's good at rehabbing birds. So if you know her, definitely hit her up on Facebook. But yeah, so that is a sad case. That sometimes birds get here and they're not in the best shape and they don't make it sometimes. And sometimes they do. But nonetheless, a really cool bird. So I hope my next one is very like, you know, good condition and looking great. Yeah, so I feel a little sad sometimes when I see that picture. Okay, April. So April, I'm now at 126 by the end of that month. It's much warmer. Our beloved longtails are coming back on the coastline. And all 23 species of birds are reproducing at this time of year. But we do get a trickle of northbound spring migrants this time of year. So birding in the spring in Bermuda is a bit mug sometimes. Like it's kind of boring sometimes because we get shafted. So in the fall, we get lots of migrant birds coming by from north to south. But when it's the other way around, when the spring birds are going back up north to breed, they just fly over Bermuda. They just keep going because they're keen to get back to their territories and find a mate. They don't have time to stop over. So Bermuda gets a bit shafted in the springtime. But when you do see them, and you do, it's rare, they're in their best shape. They're looking their brightest. They're clean. They're wearing the best attire, and they're singing. So it is still worth birding in the spring. I just look around. So the beloved longtail. Like I said, they show up in the spring, April time. They're cavity nesting birds that usually use the same cavity year round. But one thing I want to point out about this picture, two things. One, you see this little red spot right there? That's blood. So this bird was actually in a fight over a nest cavity. And fighting among longtails is quite common. They're very aggressive, and they do like to defend their cavities literally to the death. I've seen longtails like, their bills interlocked, and sometimes for hours, they might be on a cliff face fighting each other, and then you can't get to them, there's nothing you could do. But they'll be like that for hours and hours. And this thing right here, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm just like nitpicking at my pictures, but it's okay. You learned something. So this right here is a little feather mite, that little black thing. That's a feather mite that lives among the feathers of the longtails. So for that little mite, the longtail is its world, and it's kind of crazy to think about that thing lives, like all of this is its planet essentially. And there's another species of mites that live on the longtail streamer itself. So you've got these different species of mites on the head, the breast, the tail that just partition this longtail. But otherwise, they're very cool birds. Magnolia warbler. So remember how I said a lot of these birds show up in their best attire? This is an example of one of them. My friend LaShawn Smith found this bird at Southampton Princess in the, where they had the riot when they're trying to get all the furniture? Right there. So that's where I took this picture. And they called it Magnolia because apparently the first specimen was collected, I think 1810, in a magnolia tree in Mississippi. So then that name Magnolia just stuck with this bird. So this is a male bird, beautiful, beautiful. I lost my breath when I saw it because I had never seen one in pristine breeding condition. Look at that, black breastbands, the black mask, the white, beautiful bird. Another one, this is a summer tanager, same thing. So I photographed this one at Somerset Long Bay, and they love eating mulberry trees. I'm sure some of you have mulberries in your yard. It looks like a strawberry. In fact, you can see one of the fruit right there. It's not quite ripe, which is probably why he hasn't eaten it yet. But you can see if you look at his bill is actually messy. It's covered in the mulberries. So this is an example of a beautiful spring migrant bird. So imagine billions of these birds migrating up north, and then Bermuda just gets a little speckle of them. So it's hard because you go out for a week in the spring, you don't see nothing, and you just come back tanned and no birds. And then eventually you're walking, you're about to give up, and then this thing pops out, and it just brings you right back to life. It's like, I could do Somerset now, So yeah, beautiful summer tanager. The common tern, this is the bird that was dive bombing me in that photograph. So it's the common nuts, so it's quite uncommon, quite rare. So long story short, these guys, they breed on these nesting islets, so out in the open. So literally some of the islets are about half the size of this stage that I'm standing on. And they just sit in the open, and they're breeding in the spring and the summer. But we get hurricanes. So when hurricanes come, these birds have no defense. They try to ride the storm out, so they just take up in the air, and they try and just ride the whole hurricane, while it's in Bermuda. And they seem to be okay with the Category 1, Category 2. But the second you're talking 3 or higher, they're done. They're just wiped out. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of our birds that way. And the males are the ones that usually get killed off, because we learned that with common terns, the females, once they hatch, they leave. They go down south, and they leave the males and the young behind. So if there's a bad hurricane that year, all the males and all the young birds are killed. So then the following year, all the females come back, Like, where are the males? And then they're like, oh, well. Then the females start pairing up, and they lay these big, oversized, infertile clutches. So when I land, and I'm doing like my turn checks, and I see a clutch that's like 6, 7 eggs, I'm like, ugh, it's 2 females. And dare I say, I mean, David's been studying these birds for about 50 years. And trust me, I'm like a super optimistic person, but I really think this bird is going to become extirpated in our lifetime. Extirpated means locally extinct. I just don't think they're going to be viable because of global warming, the way the hurricanes are. I just don't see them surviving, for a decade or so more, which is sad. There are other species that we're hoping to get to Bermuda. We use like sounds. We have these like speakers that broadcast noises of different species of terns. And there are definitely other species that will be more equipped to handle hurricanes, but the common tern just doesn't seem to be one of them. Okay, now we're in May. So May I ended with 142, and it's very sunny. But there's very few terrestrial land birds to look at this time of the year. So the emphasis now switches from land birding to sea birding. And I actually spent about 5 days out at sea on the Atlantic Explorer during this month of May because I knew it would be some really cool birds to see out in the open ocean. Well, this one was seen in Shelley Bay, but we'll get to those ones soon. This is a brown pelican, a coastal species found throughout Florida, Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean. And occasionally we do get some blown in to Bermuda. So have you seen, it was 3 pelicans last year hanging out at Shelley Bay. This was the prettiest one. So I just photographed him. But they're very cool birds. Okay, now we're talking to some of the more dangerous ones. This is a Pomeranian Jaeger. I think of it as like the Batman of longtails, the longtail's alter ego. But they're very feisty. And they will literally chase other birds around at sea and make them so stressed that they cough up their food, and then the Jaeger will come and take the food from them. But that's what they do. The bird's okay. Like, he has to just catch another food, another squid or another fish. So I saw this bird on the Atlantic Explorer, and it hung. I mean, look how deep. So I'm in deep water, and we see water that color. So I was probably I think we were like maybe, I don't know, like 600 miles south or something like that. It was quite wild. Brown booby. I saw this bird on the Atlantic Explorer as well. And they're called boobies because people used to think they were stupid. So basically, when people would show up on these remote islands and they're hungry, you could just literally walk up to these birds and just clobber them on the head. So that's where they got their name from, and it's a brown bird. But we get quite a few of them in Bermuda as well, flying, especially like South Shore area. The Arctic tern. I saw this one on the Atlantic Explorer as well. So very similar to the common tern, but the Arctic tern has actually has a tail very reminiscent of the longtail. And this bird actually has the longest animal migration than any other animal on the planet. It nests, as the name suggests, Arctic, so it nests high up in the Arctic. And then every year they fly all the way down to Antarctica. So they spend the Arctic summer up north breeding, and then they spend the Antarctic summer during the non-breeding season. And they do this round trip, which is about 18,500 miles. Which is really, really cool. So, and this bird also, because it's in the Arctic in the summer and Antarctica in the summer, it also sees more daylight than any animal on the planet. The South Polar skua, the big cousin of the Pomeranian Jaeger. So this bird is bad news if you're a smaller seabird. So just like same thing, just like the Pomeranian Jaeger, this bird will chase down other seabirds, chase them in the air, and they get beat up sometimes, and they cough up their food, and the skua will come and take it. As the name suggests, South Polar, so this bird actually breeds in Antarctica. So it comes up north in our waters to spend its non-breeding season. So yeah, I shouldn't be saying this, but when I think of skuas, I always think of like those 90s sitcoms where like the bully will grab the kid and just like shake him until like the lunch money drops out. That's essentially what I think of when I see skuas. But that's how they survive. I mean, that's just their behavior. June. So June, I was at 144 species, so slowly getting there. The weather's much warmer, thankfully. And almost all the migrant land birds are gone in June because most of the migrant birds are now in North America breeding. So we're left with mostly like our resident birds that are breeding. So the action is still very much on the South Shore, on the ocean, looking at seabirds. So this was taken off of Cooper's Island. So if you guys have been to Cooper's Island before, you walk past the watchtower, and you get to literally the very edge of the rocks before you get to the water. if you stand there in June, especially during a southeasterly wind, so you can imagine like birds are migrating from the south, and this is Bermuda, so they're coming from the south, and then when they hit Bermuda's platform, they essentially they fan out around the circular platform. So they almost get pushed, it's like a bottleneck. So if it's a southeasterly wind in June, you can see these birds with the naked eye. And up close, this is what some of them look like. So this is a great shearwater. Comes all the way down from islands breeding like in the southern Atlantic Ocean, so like the tip of South America. So by the time it's come to Bermuda, we're talking maybe 7,500 miles of travel. Unfortunately, though, fishermen in Bermuda have a very bad reputation with these guys. Because keep in mind, so obviously Bermudians are out fishing. When these birds find a vessel, they're starving. They're running on fumes. They're like skeletons. So they do come up to fishermen when they're fishing, and when they see their bait on the hooks, they dive down, they can grab it. But then fishermen actually do tend to clobber them on the head and kill them. So I don't know. Again, we're not like an oceanic species, right? We're terrestrial, so we're in their habitat. So it's kind of annoying that we look at them as a problem, and we're the ones on the boat, not designed to be in the water. But I digress. But thankfully, there's literally hundreds and thousands of them that exist. Actually, no, I think there's millions. There's millions of these guys that exist. So that's the good news. The sandwich tern. Now, I thought this bird was called sandwich tern for years because of this little yellow tip on the bill. I'm like, oh, it looks like mustard. So just to check out my facts, I was reading about it. And I was like, oh, crap, no. It's because it's named after Sandwich Bay, which is in the UK, in Kent. So that's where they get the name from. So I photographed it. It's a pretty large tern. I photographed it off of Flats Bridge, right by the aquarium. And I was feeding in a really cool mixed species flock. So I was pretty excited to see sandwich tern. Rosier tern. So this bird does breed in Bermuda after a long period of it being locally extinct. So back in the day, naturalists would shoot these birds for their collection. And unfortunately, a naturalist caused the local extinction of this bird way back in the mid-1800s. And this bird was never seen again as a breeder for almost 200 years. But in 2018, I was with David Wingate, and we came across a breeding pair. And but unfortunately, we had a few chicks that hatched over the years, but they're still not doing too great. They haven't produced any viable eggs in the past 3 years. So it's still touch and go with them, but they're always a welcome addition to Bermuda, which is really cool. It's kind of cool to be alive to see a new species colonize Bermuda. Again, that's how it starts. That's how species arrive in Bermuda and colonize. So it's pretty cool to actually witness it. Now we're in July. I'm at 148 species, very hot. The last of the cow young are leaving this time of year. And pelagic migration slows down, so now birds are focused back on the land as opposed to the ocean. And the first trickle of migrant warblers start to come in as well. So in July, it's worth checking ponds, beaches, the rocky coast, and the greenscape. This is the willet, a beautiful shorebird with striking black and white wings. He actually has a piece of grass. I think it's widgeon grass on his face. So, again, when I see my pictures, I'm always studying them carefully, and I see any unusual things. But it gives it character. It's got a little mustache. So the willet's a fairly common bird we see in July. We don't get them every year, maybe every other year, but they're very easy to recognize. Lesser yellowlegs, another shorebird. So when you hear me say shorebird, I want you just to think a bird with very long legs and a long straight bill, and that likes to feed in mostly wet habitats. Some of them do like dry habitats, but I digress. This was taken at Bernard's Park, eating an earthworm. And actually, I was watching kiskadee. I saw this kiskadee sitting on a fence watching the yellowlegs get earthworms, and it would just steal it from the yellowlegs every time the yellowlegs had an earthworm in his bill. Unfortunately, these birds are also in decline. So in North America, there are several laws in effect that protect birds from hunting and things like that. But keep in mind, those laws only protect them in that land. They're migratory. So when they fly south and down the Caribbean, like Guadalupe, they get blasted like crazy. But it's their culture. But that's one of the reasons why the species is gradually declining. So again, back in the 60s, you would easily see 50 plus of these birds at Spittle Pond. Now, maybe a dozen, maybe 10. So they're definitely not as common as they used to be. And the same is true for this bird. This is the pectoral sandpiper. And it's called pectoral because of this brown breastband right here. But same thing. This species we don't see too often anymore because they are declining. The great heron. This one was pretty cool. I stopped by Cloverdale. Yeah, I go birdie at Cloverdale. They have a pond, it's worth it. And you can see the grass is flooded, so I must have obviously checked the ponds after it flooded. So this bird is all the way from places like Madagascar, Asia, Africa. So extremely rare bird or vagrant to see in Bermuda. And they're quite different from our usual, more familiar great blue heron. So the great blue heron has these beautiful like rusty light color right there. So if I go back, there's not a hint of red on this bird. And if you look at it, it's gray compared to the more common great blue heron that we're more familiar with. Okay, the month of August, hottest month of the year. And it sucks because if you ever go Spittle Pond in August, you get torn apart by horseflies. And they literally take a chunk out of your thighs when you're birding. So you'd be looking and it's like, it really hurts. Like they make you bleed, the horseflies. Have you ever seen them? They're terrible. But anyway, this time of year, bird watchers are torn between wooded habitats and aquatic habitats because you've got warblers in the woods and you've got shorebirds in the ponds. So it's a tricky time to be a birder in July. Now the shorebird, this is the least sandpiper, least. So it's the smallest shorebird on the planet. It's about the size of a house sparrow, extremely tiny. And this bird breeds all the way up close to the Arctic, for perspective. Very cute little bird, and they're distinctive. Brown body, white underparts, these like yellowy legs. Again, super tiny. They tend to get bullied by the other shorebirds. So all these shorebirds, they come and they divvy up the habitat. So like maybe like a stretch of mudflat from here to that side, that's theirs. And then another species will divvy it up. And the poor least sandpiper just gets bullied. Like, you'll get chased from here. It's like, okay, I'll go over here. And then another bird will be like, no, I'm feeding here. It's like, okay, I'll go over here. So it sucks to be the smallest shorebird of the planet. But again, they're another cool addition. The spotted sandpiper. This bird has a special place in my heart. It was like the first bird David Wingate taught me how to identify. And it's got these beautiful black spots in the belly. And they have this habit of like, if this is the bird itself, it teeters like this with every step it takes. And we have no idea why they do this. We thought maybe they're mimicking like the current of the water as it eats to trick its prey. But then when the eggs hatch with these guys, within minutes, the young just start teetering right out of the eggshell. So we don't know why they teeter like that, but it helps with the identification, which is nice. The yellow-throated warbler, another very cool bird. You usually see them in more open green space, so like golf courses, with like a row of casuarinas or a hibiscus hedge. They're not really like a thicket bird, so I wouldn't go deep into the bushes looking for this bird. You'd want to be in the more open green spaces, sparse trees about. And they nest all throughout southeast U.S. And because their range is so far south, many of them actually don't even migrate in the winter. A lot of them just opt to stay because in the states that they inhabit, it's fairly tame weather. But we do get a good bit of yellow-throated warblers coming to Bermuda. This is the prothonotary warbler, probably one of my favorite warblers to see in August. Sorry, I never tell you what a warbler is. A warbler is essentially like a group of probably about 50 species. They're songbirds, and they're usually bright yellow. They come in shades of blue, green, but most species of warbler have yellow in them. So this bird is usually found in the mangroves. So if you go to any mangrove in August, you're very likely to bump into one of these guys. They seldom spend the winter in Bermuda, but they occasionally do. But your best chance to see them is in any mangrove patch in the month of August. So this thing, the hell is that? So this is called a common nighthawk, and it's a bit misleading because this is not nocturnal, and it's not a hawk. So I don't know who named. I think they call them nighthawks because I guess they hawk insects. That could be a sandwich turn thing. I don't know. But nonetheless, these birds hunt moths during dusk and dawn. But they don't hunt at night. And during the day, they find a horizontal perch. It's usually a tree branch. But this one was sitting on a telephone wire when I was getting into my car. So that was a really beautiful bird to happen upon. I actually saw a friend of mine texted me this. He goes, "What's this?" And it was sitting on his balcony railing, like right outside his window, which was really incredible. But they are really cool birds. Okay, September. All right, 170, getting there. There's another yellow-throated warbler right there. Took this one in my backyard, I think. But anyway, so the country, as you know, Bermuda is whacked by hurricanes in the month of September. Fabian, right? But then the first fall cold fronts start to arrive. Whoops. But it's a very good month to see shorebirds, warblers, terns, swallows, raptors, and flycatchers, as well as herons. This is a black tern. This is a type of species. So unlike the common tern that nests here on the islets around salt water, black terns like freshwater, like marshes. And they nest on like floating mats of vegetation. In the breeding season, this bird is entirely black with beautiful gray wings. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I actually like them in their non-breeding plumage more, I think. But again, that's just me. The sanderling. If any of you have been to the beach, especially South Shore, these birds make me laugh because they're always like running like they're late, like they missed the bus. And I happened to catch this bird in mid-stride, so his feet are not touching the sand, which is so funny little bird. So what they're doing is they run towards the surf. So when the water retracts in the waves in the beach, they run, and like those bubbles you see? So a lot of those bubbles are actually like polychaetes and worms among the sand grains. So when they're blowing the air, they're blowing all the water out of their cavities. The soundings will come like, oh, and they start feeding. But then the waves start to come back. It's like, oh, gotta run. And then the waves go back out, oh, okay. So this bird is so cool. I mean, they used to be so common. Again, like in the 60s, you would see flocks of maybe like 50 or 100 birds just running, up and down, and now I see 2 or 3 at any given time. I think the max I've seen is maybe like 10, and that's once. So there are another shorebird that's in decline, unfortunately, but sanderling, very, very cute birds. This is the eastern kingbird. So if you look closely, this bird might look vaguely familiar. Does it remind you of any bird that's in Bermuda that we have as a resident? No, it's yellow. Yeah, kiskadee, yeah. This bird is a tyrant flycatcher, just like the kiskadee. And so his Latin name, Tyrannus tyrannus. So tyrannus it's highlighting the fact that it's a tyrant because they're so aggressive. And also tyrant for king, like a crown. So this bird, believe it or not, it has a bright red patch of feathers on its head, but it's concealed by the black cap right now. But if this bird was pissed, it would just fling it up, just like the kiskadee would. Yeah, so I photographed this bird at the Royal Cemetery just before you get to the glass beach, as if you're going to Dockyard. Yeah. Royal tern. So this bird looks like a longtail at first glance, right? But if you look close to it, it's okay, wait a minute, where's the longtail? And the feet are quite long for this bird. This bird is actually much bigger than, well, not much bigger, but it's bigger than a longtail. But there are another coastal species of tern that we do get. So my friend Paul Watson reported this, let's say at 9 o'clock. And then at 9:01, I was in the car, and I was just like speeding over the causeway. Didn't see it. I dipped it, right? But then the next day, I went to the causeway, and I pulled over by the lay-by, and I just waited, and I waited. And my bird magnet kicked in, and it finally flew over. So I was really happy to get a picture of this bird. American redstart. So this is another species of warbler we do get in Bermuda. And so on one side, this bird is extremely common, the species. Most of the birds that come to Bermuda that are redstarts are immature birds. So they come in shades of gray and a little bit of yellow. But to see one in this plumage, only about 1% of the birds come to Bermuda. You see it like this. And crazy enough, I saw 3 of them in 2023 last year, which was like insane. But a very beautiful bird as well. Okay, October, my favorite birding month. This is by far Bermuda's best birding month. So I'm at 197 species by the end of October. Oh, I say right there, Bermuda's best birding month. Yeah, I'm not lying. Cold fronts keep bringing these birds in. And this is the best time. We get the most birds in October, the highest species richness and abundance. And October is the month you're more likely to get a new record for Bermuda. So this bird here, this is called a sage phoebe. So my brother Luke, I had reported in the group chat about a bird called a painted bunting I had seen. And so he went to twitch it, but he dipped on it. But then he got a consolation prize in the form of this sage phoebe. And for perspective, the last time this bird was seen was in 1994. So he wasn't even born yet, which is really cool. So this was the second record, and it was a lifer for pretty much all of us, which was really great. And we managed to catch up with it at the airport fence. But it was also a one-day wonder. So we saw it sail on the Monday. It was never seen again. Yeah. So we were very, and the sun was going down. So we're like, it's got to be around here somewhere. And then Paul's like, I see it. I'm like, I'm coming. So like, yeah, so we managed to get some pictures of it before the sun went down. So thank you, Luke. American kestrel. So this is the smallest bird of prey in North America. It's a tiny little thing. Remember the mourning dove I showed you? This kestrel is about the size of a mourning dove. And they do this really cool hunting thing where it looks like they're hovering, but they're not. Let's say the wind is coming this way. The kestrel is basically flying into the headwind, looking down, just like hovering like this. Sorry, I used the word hovering. You know what I mean? It's just like doing this. And then it's looking for like crickets and small mice hiding in the grass. One thing I should mention too, which is really cool, birds can see into the UV. So they have a broader color spectrum than we do. So when birds look at each other, they see colors in themselves that we can't see. So I'm pretty sure when longtails see each other, because we look at longtails like, well, how do they tell each other apart? But I'm pretty sure when longtails look at each other, they must see colors on themselves that we just have no idea. But anyway, apparently these birds, because they could see into the UV, they could see like the neon like urine trail of like the mammals they're hunting in the grass, which I think is really cool. American bittern. This is literally my favorite bird, and I think it became my favorite bird because of how hard they are to find and photograph. It was a nemesis bird for me for a long time. And when I wasn't even thinking about it, I was like in my car and I was reversing and I look in my rearview mirror and I could see it in the background in someone's yard. It's like, I got so excited. So I literally drove my car. I stayed in the car and I drove up to this thing. And then it did this, you know, it puts its neck up like this. So bitterns are funny. They have this habit of, when it's doing this, we call this the bittern stance. So when this bird, it freezes in place and puts its neck up just like that. And it tends to blend in well with the right background. So you can imagine if this bird was standing and all the vegetation was brown, that bird would disappear. But this bird will sometimes do it in the funniest places. I've seen people send me pictures of them like in their driveway. It's asphalt. The bird's just like, it's like we see you, bro. Like we see you. Yeah. But I always thought they were really, really cool birds, and I was so happy to to finally catch up with it. They are in decline too, unfortunately. I've read that book I told you about earlier, like way back. There were stories of people hunting these at like Pembroke Marsh. It's like, yeah, we went to Pembroke Marsh, we shot 6 American bitterns. I'm like, 6? I've never even seen 6 before across 10 years. So they were very abundant back in the day, but yeah, very cool bird. White-throated sparrow. I took this picture in Dockyard, and funny enough, some cruise ships had just arrived, and a visiting birder found these, and he's convinced, and the more I think about it, I think he's right. This bird probably is a ship-assisted bird. So you've got these migrant birds flying over the ocean, and they're running out of energy. Oh, look, a cruise ship, thank God. And they land on it, and the cruise ship just carries them to Bermuda. And they're like, oh, grass. And they just jump off the boat. And look, I mean, I got a picture of him. He's eating. So he's so hungry. So I put this picture too because if you see a brown bird, a sparrow with a beautiful snow-white throat, it's not a house sparrow. You're definitely looking at a white-throated sparrow. Upland sandpiper. This is another one like the bittern. Okay, so all the birders in the WhatsApp, they would know. I could not shut up about this bird. I made sure they knew every month. I was like, I want to get an upland sandpiper. I want everyone to know this is the bird I want to photograph more than any other. And again, I think it's because it's a species in decline. My first encounter with one was with David Wingate. We're sitting at BIOS on the balcony, and we're looking. He's got a telescope, so we're scanning the airport. So I'm talking across Ferry Reach on the turf of the airport. And he goes, oh, good God, I got one, Miguel. Look, look, look. So I'm like looking, and I'm looking at it. And keep in mind, it's like heat coming off the tarmac. There's fumes from the jets. So I'm looking at this thing, and it's just like, and he's like, you see it? I'm like, yeah, I guess, yeah. So for years, when people were like, have you seen an upland sandpiper? I'd be like, yes. So I was so happy to finally bump into one. This was at Pembroke Marsh, or the dump. So I had just helped a friend get his truck out of the mud. And then I turned around, I put my gear on, I took 10 steps, and this bird showed up. And I was just like, so it felt very rewarding to see this bird after doing helping somebody out. November, look, I passed 200. I made it to 200 and I got to 206. So not only did I reach my goal, I surpassed it. So I was very happy. So it's obviously very cold in November, plenty of cold fronts still, and this is when many of our waterfowl start arriving to Bermuda, mostly the ducks and the herons and things like that. So this is like nearing the end of the fall migration, so November could be kind of quiet birding-wise. The Bermuda petrel. Yeah, so this is our national bird. The longtail was for a long time our national bird, but it's been given rightfully so to the Bermuda petrel. And everyone knows the story of David Wingate, helping with the nests. But we actually have another hero in the audience, Jeremy Mejias, who, yeah, please clap for him, please. So Jeremy adopted some of David's techniques with the nest burrows, but then he took a step further. He adopted something called translocation. So with seabirds, long story short, when a chick is about to leave the nest or fledge, they typically imprint on their surroundings. So taking advantage of that, well, Jeremy first flew to Australia, got some training, and basically he would take chicks from the burrows from one island because a lot of them were about to be swamped because of climate change. And when hurricanes come, those nests would flood. So he thought of a great idea to take some of those chicks just before they're about to fledge. He hand-reared them and put them in a new burrow, so when they fledged, they will come back to the translocated site, which was Nonsuch, which is a much bigger, taller island. So because of his hard work, as of last year, I believe we're at 156 pairs compared to the 18 pairs when David was 15 years old. So a lot of work has gone into this. And because of that, because of his hard work, many photographers come to Bermuda every year in November to photograph. They actually have boating trips to see the cahao. And by the way, it's very ironic because we thought the cahao was extinct for almost 300 years. And now, fast forward to the 21st century, the cahao is doing great, and all the other birds seem to be declining. So it's kind of ironic in that respect. But beautiful, beautiful bird. So we do have bird watching tours to see the cahao in November. You can book it through the aquarium or the Audubon Society. Really good time to see it up close. This is the blue-headed vireo. This bird is a distant relative to the chick of the village. So if you look at it, it looks like a chick of the village, but it's got a blue head and beautiful white little, we call it like spectacles or little glasses. I found this bird, I was walking by Cooper's Island along the walking trail, and it popped out. They're quite rare, so normally we get maybe one a year, and in 2023 we had 4 of them, 2 of which I was happy to say I saw. So, they come from like northern Canada. Yellow-bellied sapsucker. Yeah, as I take a drink too. So the sapsucker is Bermuda's most common wintering woodpecker that we have. And I really love them because they have a habit of leaving these distinct row of holes in the tree. So they basically, they're on the tree and they have a tail. These 2 feathers are very stiff. So they use that to keep themselves like a prop. And it kind of just like hops up and up and up. And they basically scar the tree with these holes. And we believe the sapsuckers must have some sort of like enzyme in his tongue which encourages the sap to weep out from these holes. I've read studies where people have tried to imitate that technique with a nail and a hammer, and apparently the hammer does not cause much sap to come out compared to like a naturally made sapsucker well. So there's obviously some trick the bird has, and the best explanation we have is something in his tongue or saliva, an enzyme that's causing it to weep. But they're very, very beautiful birds. This is the ash-throated flycatcher. 2 of them popped up last year. This particular one was found by a birder named Ava Patelli. So she and her mother usually drive around and look for birds, and she's in the birders chat as well. This one was hanging out by Kinley Field. So if you know like the baseball diamond, and there's some like newly planted cedars, this bird was hanging out there. And it hung around for about, gosh, at least 3 months. It was last seen this January, and then it seems to have left. So a few people tried to see it this year, and they dipped on it. So yeah, but beautiful birds all the way from the west coast, so like Alaska, BC, and some of the southwestern states. It's an open country bird, and they actually have a habit of making their nests. They incorporate like snakeskin when they're making a nest, which is really cool. All right, the last month, December. Very cold, windy time of the year. Bomb cyclone. Okay, I didn't know this term existed until like 2022, 2021. So I started freaking out because I watched CNN. It's like, there's a bomb cyclone coming. I was like, what's that? And it turns out bomb cyclones actually do bring vagrant birds to Bermuda from time to time, especially winter finches. So if the cone crop is very poor up north, finches up north come migrating south and they disperse. And if we're lucky, some of those birds come to Bermuda. But we got no finches last December, unfortunately. Ringneck duck. So these birds, it's funny. So remember the shotgun era I told you about of ornithology? So this is an example of a bird that's poorly named. So basically, again, they're called ringneck ducks because they have this vague chestnut ring around the neck. But you can't see it unless you have the bird like this close to your face. So basically, people shot birds and they were studying it, like, oh yeah, ringneck duck, perfect. Oh, that's all good name this bird. But of course, these days we don't shoot birds like that. So even now, it's hard to see the ring around his neck. But nonetheless, very cool ducks we get. I saw these ones at Eves Pond, the new nature reserve that was set up by Shelley Bay. So don't forget Eves Pond. The trees are getting taller, so it's hard to see the pond from the road. So definitely still stick your head in there, because you just never know. The great blackback gull, the largest species of gull on the planet. Cross Island, where they had America's Cup, where you guys were sitting off. Gulls love it, because there's no humans there, so they just sit off after fishing, and they just sit there in massive flocks. But yeah, this is the great blackback gull. It's a tank of a bird, really, really big. This is an immature bird. So in adult plumage, this bird will have a jet black back and an all white belly. So if you ever see a seagull or a gull that has like a mottled checker pattern, chances are it's an immature bird. This is the lesser blackback gull. You guys have probably seen this one before. It's by far Bermuda's most common gull species that come here in the winter. And what's strange is this is a European species. And they started coming here more frequently, probably like within the past 10 years. Before that, this bird was like a mega. It was rare. You would twitch this bird back then. Now it's become quite common. But I still appreciate them because they're quite pretty. Yeah, and lastly, the American robin. So this bird was eating Brazil pepper at Ferry Reach. These birds do get themselves into trouble because in the winter they switch to mostly fruit, and if they pack too much fruit away, they do get a bit drunk and lethargic and sleepy. But it's kind of strange seeing this bird from North America in Bermuda eating a plant that's from like South America. So it just blows my mind. But yeah, so in a nutshell, if you walk away from this talk with anything, I hope you realize, Bermuda is a very cool place for birds. We have lots of habitats of all kinds, and unfortunately a lot of them are threatened, especially by development. So it's very important to, speak up and, just advocate for protecting Bermuda's habitats and whatnot. Because this small little rock in the middle of the Atlantic could help you learn it does serve as either a resting spot. So these birds might be here for a day, for as long as a year. And I think we should do our part to protect our habitats. So with that, thank you.